To unpack this further for us, we're now joined by Dr. Charles Sinkala, who's an international relations consultant, and he joins us via our Zoom link for more analysis on the Zimbabwe election results. Dr. Charles, thank you so much for joining us here on the late edition today. Perhaps let's start off here. What are your thoughts on the victory of Emmerson Mnangagwa as the president of Zimbabwe? Dr. Sinkala, I think you have muted yourself. Could you please unmute and then you can continue with your comments?
My apologies. Thank you very much once again for having me again. It is not something that we have been shocked from the international community, and I think to some large extent, Zimbabweans really desperately needed a change, a change from the ZANU-PF. Maybe a new kid should have been a better candidate for Zimbabwe, but the results are the way they are at the moment, and there's nothing we can do. Only hope that Zimbabweans must forge ahead, to start rebuilding their country of what President Emmerson Mnangagwa started with earlier.
And of course, we know and we've seen Nelson Chamisa from the CCC rejecting these results. Of course, we are not surprised, especially in the manner in which these elections were handled.
Yes. No, look, we're not very surprised, especially when you look at the SADC head of the mission, Dr. Nevas Mumba's preliminary report, which he has cited, not something new that we have seen in the last 21 years in Zimbabwe. We remember very well when Morgan Shangirai was also victimized and how political prosecutions has happened. And I think Zimbabwe has been termed as a police state by violating a lot of human rights violations. And I think one will also understand why sanctions has continued to be imposed on Zimbabwe due to not having a fair deal in terms of the democracy, and as well as allowing opposition political parties to participate freely in run-up to the elections. As well, you can see their unpreparedness of running to the second day in terms of voting, unprecedented in the history of the new times now, like what we have seen, especially that we've seen successful elections in the SADC region. Zambia had very successful elections in 2021, South Africa had, and they're preparing for the next elections next year. But Zimbabwe is something completely different in terms of the way they conduct their elections, in terms of preparedness as well.
And a lot of concern coming out from many quarters when it comes to the manner in which the ZEC actually dealt with these elections. Of course, we saw the delays coming out and, of course, the elections being extended to a second day. When, you look in and zoom into the position of ZEC itself, and at the same time, looking at the intimidation by voters, and of course some saying that this was done by the Forever Association Zimbabwe. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yes, Mbali, you're very correct. And I think those intimidations are not part and parcel of the free and fair elections in Zimbabwe. I think to my understanding, my view is that the ZANU-PF, who liberated the Zimbabweans in 1980, have run out of definitely ideas, in terms of offering a solution to the economical uphill in terms of the Zimbabwean economy. I think we've seen how they have made up very, very bad policies in terms of land restitutions and other vices in terms of economic empowerment, threatening and removing investments from Zimbabwe. I think the only fight which they had and they have is the ZANU-PF to stay in power. It's very unlikely for them to turn around the tables in terms of providing the economic turnaround times to provide an opportunity to most Zimbabweans. We thought when the RG Robert Gabriel Mugabe, may he so rest in peace, when he was deposed from power, that Zimbabwe shall be on the trajectory of building the nation. And it gave a lot of hopes to most Zimbabweans who actually at that time they returned, only to be found that they jumped out of the fire, out of the frying pan into the fire.
And of course, the credibility of these elections also come to the fore. And we've seen those glaring reports coming out from SADC and other observer missions. When we head into this new terrain where we've seen that Emmerson Mnangagwa has been declared, the president of Zimbabwe once again, and he heads in for a second term. What do you make of the credibility of these elections and how he actually ascended to a second term?
Well, the credibility of Zimbabwe Electoral Commission has been compromised. There are some reports that we've seen in the preliminary report from the SADC head of the mission, Dr. Nevas Mumba, who cited that they had some reports from the stakeholders that leading to the elections, those who are heading the Zimbabwean Electoral Commission were offered the large sums of money. And you can see the disparities in terms of the results. 52, 55%, maybe most to 44%, Nelson Chamisa, and the others, the smaller ones. Even if you add up the rest of those who participated in the elections, I don't think it can add up to the elections that they have pointed out in terms of the polls. And the many inconsistencies in terms of the constitution, the freedom of expression, which hasn't been fully been understood and implemented in Zimbabwe, and as well as freedom of assembly. Those are violations that Zimbabwe now has been found to be repeating the same problems that they've had in the last elections, which has been violence. I'm also very surprised to note that former president of Mozambique, Joaquim Chissano, who actually visited the president-elect Emmerson Mnangagwa, condemned the head of mission from SADC, Dr. Nevas Mumba, citing that Dr. Nevas Mumba shouldn't be talking about the injustices and as well as the malpractices or malfunction of the Zimbabwe's Electoral Commission. I found that to be unfortunate that, they continue would like us to believe or to conceal the facts thereof of what is exactly happening in Zimbabwe. But most of the Zimbabweans now, they've been shut down of their hopes. Most of them literally wanted to go back and cast that vote, but casting their vote with the rigging and the mechanism from the government has proved to be unfruitful.
And we've seen the likes of Kasakuere saying that they will be reaching out to the SADC Troika for some sort of intervention. Can Zimbabweans be hopeful that there can be some sort of intervention when we even see the likes of the ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula, also commenting when it comes to the manner in which these elections were handled? Isn't there hope for Zimbabweans through the SADC Troika?
No, not at all, not at all. Mbali, you must remember very well when former President Thabo Mbeki, the disputed 2015 elections, I think it was 2005, if I may be corrected correctly. Those elections where actually Morgan Tsvangirai was proved to have won those elections, but there were some negotiations where a government of unity was actually implemented, where Morgan Tsvangirai was actually made the Prime Minister of Zimbabwe. And unfortunately, he died because they couldn't work together. But where there is no rule of law, where there's no respect for the Constitution, where the Chapter 12 of Section 235 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe is not respected, and there's no separation of power, where the government, they interfere with each and every institution in the country, it becomes very difficult even to challenge such an election such as this. Many elections have been challenged by either the previous opposition leaders who felt that they won the elections or they had the voters, but nothing has happened. I can give very quickly an example, Bali, that the way the Constitution Section 7.1.1 says that there cannot be more than 20% in terms of either higher or lower turnout in terms of in the constituency, but the government and the Electoral Commission of Zimbabwe actually used an average in terms of adding up the tallies, which is inconsistent with the constitution. Our only hope is that Zimbabweans themselves, they must not wait for the 5 years. They must engage the government of Zimbabwe, the newly, which is going to be elected, and see how they can start pushing some reforms and ensuring that Zimbabwe gets onto the better trajectory than where it is at the moment. The external influence from SADC, I don't think they can do anything better because Zimbabwe is a sovereign state.
Dr. Sinkala, thank you so much for your contribution. That is Dr. Charles Sinkala, an international relations consultant, and just giving us analysis on the Zimbabwe elections.